All right, y'all, so I saw Lisa Frankenstein last night. Let's talk about it. Never mind that getting to the movie theater last night was a nightmare, but that was honestly my fault. I'm the one that lives in a city that has a Mardi Gras season. I'm the one who lives on a parade route and decided right before the parade start to leave my house. But it's okay, we live and learn and we repeat the same mistakes next year. How did I like the movie? So just to kind of give you a good idea as to what this movie is about, because I think the trailers are a little misleading. I think the trailers are kind of giving the vibe of a romance more than it actually is. This really isn't a romance. I mean, the romance part of the story doesn't really take off until the very end, and by the time we get there, the movie's over. But this movie is about a young girl named Lisa Swallows. She's 17 years old. She lives somewhere suburbia, 1989, and she recently lost her mother. She's grieving that loss. Part of her grieving is spending time in an old abandoned cemetery, and she has picked a grave that she's slightly obsessed with. It's her favorite. She tends to it, takes care of it. She even gave the bust on this grave, which is the bust of the young man who's buried, her rosary, her mother's rosary. Well, she lives with her dad, her stepmom, and her stepsister. Her and her stepsister seem to get along. Her stepsister is a bit of a ditzy cheerleader, somewhat self-absorbed, means well kind of type. We've seen this character in movies where it's the girl who's the popular girl, who is, seems to be all about things that don't matter, but she has such a good heart. That's Taffy, the sister. So she's trying to include her, invite her to things, take her to parties. She ends up at a party where she's almost assaulted. But it's okay though, because there's a freak lightning storm happening and the sky is green. She goes home, smashes a mirror, upsets her stepmother, whom we don't really like from the get-go, so it's okay. And then the graveyard is destroyed or something, and she's sad about it because that's where her dead friend is. But it's okay though, because later that night when she gets home from work and her family is out doing other things, the dead guy breaks into her house. Now, young man, I know you've been dead for a while, but you did live in a time where you had houses and doors, so I don't understand why he didn't just knock. Because he seemed to mean well. I mean, she didn't know that. She's screaming at the top of her lungs, running around the house like a crazy person. And then all of a sudden, she seems cool and sweet and is like, what's going on? Do you want to listen to music? And invites him upstairs. And that's when she realizes that this is the resurrected body, so to speak, of the guy that she's been obsessed with, this dead dude or whatever. And they go about this adventure of making him whole, because he's missing some pieces. He's missing a hand, I think he's missing some fingers, I can't remember, and he's missing an earlobe. And they go about getting these pieces by killing people. Now it starts off as an accident when they realize that, all we have to do is kill someone and take their body parts, and then we can reattach them to you and then put you in the tanning bed, because he needs electricity in order for these parts to even work properly, because apparently once you attach to your earlobe you can hear now. Now the guy that she took the hand from, we don't like him. The dead dude, whose name we never learn, which I appreciate, because obviously this is a weird little take on Frankenstein, and in the book Frankenstein, we don't know the creature's name because the creature doesn't have one. So he's simply just cast as the creature. And he seems to have feelings for her. He cares about her. He's in love with her, which is why he ended up at her house in the first place, because he thought she wanted to be with him. But her being a dumb teenage girl who is just so consumed with her own life and her own thoughts is completely oblivious, and she is just obsessed with this other nerdy lit magazine editor dude who's apparently not all that interested in her, but we don't learn about that till later. That's basically the story. There's not really much more to tell after that. The movie runs about 100 minutes, give or take. So it's not very long, relatively short. I'm loving all these short movies lately, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if I liked it. I don't know if I didn't like it. I would watch it again. I would sit down and watch it again. This is one of those movies in about 5 to 10 years from now, it becomes a cult classic, so to speak. This is one of those movies that it's not very good, but it spawns costume ideas for Halloween. Kind of like Suicide Squad with Harley Quinn. That movie wasn't good at all, but every little girl was Harley Quinn. It's one of those movies that has that appeal to it because the costuming and even the production design is so elaborate and so specific. But I don't know if I liked it or not. I don't know if I didn't. I think I kind of feel indifferent, but I know that if this were to come on television, I would sit down and watch it. Does that make sense? Some issues that I had with the movie, the pacing. The pacing was a little inconsistent and it was a little off. At the very beginning of the movie, so before we even get to meet Dead Dude, the movie is just very dry and very boring. I was almost checked out. She's not a very interesting character. There's really not much to her. That's the weak point here, is the character development. We're not really seeing, we don't really get a sense of who she is personality wise. We get a sense of who her sister is, who her dad is, who her stepmom is, but I just feel like she's very flat and very dry. She's just not a very well-rounded character. If I'm being real with you, I really didn't like her at all. Now, Dead Dude, we'll come back to him. I think the movie being tonally inconsistent is what just has me not so sure, because this is a horror comedy, right? And I definitely laughed, and it's funny. It's not scary, but it's a horror comedy, so I'm not expecting to be like shaking in my boots, having nightmares at night. I think what this movie was trying to do, I don't know if it succeeded or not. I don't know if this movie was trying to resurrect an old genre, the campy 80s horror kind of B movie, or if this was trying to satirize that. I don't think this movie accomplished its goal of doing one thing or the other, but it did pay homage, I think, to that era. That it did do well. I don't think it did well in resurrecting an old genre. I don't think it did well in satirizing it, but I did think it did well paying homage. There are a lot of little things in this movie that pay homage to the film industry in general. There's a poster on her wall of the moon with a rocket in its eye. And then we see an animation after of that happening, the rocket going into the moon's eye. This is an old silent film. So for those who recognize it, it's a kind of sweet little, haha, I know what that is. But if you've ever seen Hugo, Martin Scorsese's Hugo, that movie also pays homage to that same film. So there are definitely a lot of things that pay homage to the era of the 80s, and then things that pay homage to just film in general. But what I think this movie does very well is just the overall color palette of the movie, just the overall aesthetics in general. Just the costuming, hair, makeup, it's so over exaggerated. And this is why I think this movie was trying to satirize the 80s, because it was so over exaggerated. It was overdone. Think about movies and television shows that take place in the 80s, Stranger Things, and even, the It franchise. And both of these movies, television show and movies take place in the 80s, and they all have, these kind of toned down elements of the 80s. It's enough to let you know that this is not present day, but it's enough to kind of remind you of what was. It's not too much. This was too much, but the too much, I think, worked. It worked. But at the same time, it failed in what it was trying to do, and I think it's because the pacing was just so bad. So I love the over-the-top 80s makeup, teased hair, the crazy colored houses. Kind of reminds me of living here in New Orleans. Every house is a different color. And I like that. I love it when we decide we're gonna go all out, we're gonna do the dang thing, we're gonna make this completely ridiculous, and we're gonna acknowledge that it's ridiculous. When you can make fun of yourself in film, I think that's when it works. So just the satire elements in the hair, clothing, and makeup, that worked. But the overall project as a whole, trying to satirize an old genre, I don't think it succeeded in doing that. The other thing that worked for this movie was Cole Sprouse. He's so talented, I had no idea. Again, I didn't like her character very much at all, but I loved him. He was great. So he didn't have any speaking parts at all. So it was mostly grunts, facial expressions, body movement. It was pure physical comedy, and he nailed it. He killed it. He did such a good job. He, to me, was the highlight of the whole movie. He made it worth watching. Before we even get to him, it's boring, it's dry. I'm already done with her. Once he enters the frame, It's wonderful. And this is where it's slightly ironic, for me anyway, because the movie's all about her, right? She's Lisa Frankenstein. She's the title character. She's the main character. But that very beginning, before we get to him, I'm done with her. I'm annoyed with her. I don't want to see her no more. And then he enters the frame, and that's when she becomes interesting. Once he steps into the frame, she becomes interesting. Even though her character is supposed to be very depressed, kind of blah, and a little lifeless, she's just, I don't like her. She's just boring. I've seen, lifeless, I've seen, depressed, and I've seen sad characters, but I've also seen them interesting. She's just not interesting. She's just not. But he is. And this is where it's kind of ironic, because again, the movie's all about her, right? And yet his character has more personality. We know a lot about him just from the limited range of motion, the fact that he's very sensitive, and he's vulnerable, and he has such a big heart. He cares for her, he loves her, he'd do anything for her. She was so dang dumb. Like, you're chasing tail that doesn't want you, and this dead man over here wants you. Like, what's the problem? So this movie stars Katherine Newton, Cole Sprouse, directed by Zelda Williams in her directorial debut. Zelda Williams being the daughter of the late and great Robin Williams, and it's written by Diablo Cody. I feel like that's the important part, written by Diablo Cody. If I remember correctly, Diablo Cody won an Oscar for Juno. I believe she won Best Original Screenplay, if I remember correctly, and it was nominated for like 1 or 2 other Oscars. I wouldn't call Diablo Cody seasoned. She's definitely been around for a while. She definitely has, made a name for herself in this industry, and she's recognizable instantly when you hear that name. You already know Juno, Jennifer's Body. But I would never use the word seasoned. The word that I would use for her would be very specific. She's specific. She has a very specific style in the way that she writes, in the way that she builds characters, in the way that she builds universes and cities, and in the way that she writes humor. Very specific. And I think when you have someone who writes with such specificity, who has a very, defined style with respect to their writing, you need the right director. And I don't know if people will be afraid to say it or not, because again, this is the daughter of Robin Williams, whom we all love, right? I think that's the issue here. The direction. I don't think Zelda Williams was the right director for this. I don't think she was quite ready or up to the task to handle this kind of project, because the pacing issue is all on her. That's not to say she doesn't have potential, though. I would have no problem seeing whatever it is she came up with next, but I don't think she was quite ready for this. I think this should have been handed off to another director. Someone who knows what to do with a very specific style. I don't think Zelda Williams is just quite there yet, but she can get there. She just needs more practice. Now, a question that I've already gotten from a few parents: is this movie appropriate for my child? Now, as I always say, you know your child, you know your family, you know what's appropriate for your family, you know what values you hold, so always keep that in mind before going to see a movie. That being said, I believe this movie is rated PG-13, obviously for violence and some sexual content. I don't think there's any bad language in here that I can remember. Mostly, if there is bad language, it's just, slang. It's nothing derogatory in that sense. But, I'm going to make sure I put a spoiler alert tag on here, but there is a scene where, our dearly beloved creature hacks off a man's appendage with an axe and then has it reattached, because like I said, he's missing body parts, and then he has to go into the tanning bed with the short and lightening up so that it works properly, and they find out that works. It's not graphic by any means. There are 2 sex scenes in this movie, but they're both implied. They're not graphic. You don't see anything or anything like that. It's very artistically done. At least one of them is. One of it's just kind of 2 people in bed. The other one, it's an artistic expression. Like, what's happening, you know what's going on. We're gonna give you a very creative way of explaining what's happening. So I've had somebody ask, is it appropriate for their tween? I think your tween will be fine. Again, having heard that, you have to make the decision on whether or not that's appropriate for your kid. I can only tell you what I saw. But I can also recommend like an age group. I think if your child is under the age of 13, proceed with caution. Anything over that, your kid will be fine. But anything under than 13, like, don't send them alone. And that's all I got for Lisa Frankenstein today. Parents, don't forget to check me out on Criticalist for more information on whether or not this will be appropriate for your family. If you see the movie, let me know in the comments section. If you're going on a date on Valentine's Day to see this movie, I want to hear about it. Let me know. What did y'all wear? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.